Everyone, and welcome to another episode in Conversations in the Future of Work. I am your host, Rachel Cossar, co-founder and CEO at Virtual Sapiens, and I am really excited about today's topic, which is focused on virtual meetings. We'll talk about hybrid meetings as well, and we have two incredible guests who are the founders of a company called MeetBee. And so with that, Elan, please introduce yourself.
Hi, Rachel. I'm Elan Ressel, and I'm the CEO of MeetBee. MeetBee is a company that is focused on making virtual meetings better. And we're basically a virtual outsourced virtual meeting production company, if I could put it into a short sentence.
Amazing. And you have like a really interesting background too.
Yeah, it's kind of a combination of different things, a background as a voiceover artist, a video producer, an e-learning creator, for want of a better term, and then also a virtual facilitator and virtual producer. So if you combine all of those five things all into one, that's kind of where you find me at this point in my career.
Awesome. I love that. So we're going to get into that in a little more in a second. Marc, over to you.
Rachel, thank you so much. Well, I can say very, very clearly that Elan has got pretty much everything around MeetBee down pat. I would say that very much what we have focused on over the last few years in identifying specific opportunities where virtual meetings have still persisted post-pandemic. And when Elan speaks about the e-learning environment, what we defined and identified when it came to MeetBee's target audiences is the continuing professional education space, where there's a lot of ongoing education and training there. And what they found when they went to the pandemic is what was historically in person went into a webinar format. And then post-pandemic, everyone just found it to be far more convenient than meeting in person. So that gives you a perspective of where MeetBee kind of lies.
Yeah, awesome. So Marc, I'd like to stick with you for this, but how do you share the crossroads between your personal experience? We heard a little bit about Elan's background, but how have your personal professional experiences come in to influence your role as a coach and now your work with MeetBee?
It's a great question. I came from the world of voice acting and voiceovers. I've been doing it for well over 25 years now. And for about 10 of my years in my career, I was a national television news anchor, and I read the news and television every single day. And when we went into this virtual environment, as you had mentioned, the coaching and the facilitation a few years before the pandemic, initially I was wondering, how do my skills fit in terms of this environment? But what you learn from television is very much the same that you're trying to take into a virtual meeting. And it comes down to being very mindful that you are in a space with a camera and your audience is distributed all across the country or all across the world. When you go into a virtual meeting, you have to take that same consideration of how do you keep people engaged? How do you keep people focused? And how do you draw them to be prompted to do certain things? When we started MeetBee and integrating the considerations of supporting virtual meetings and supporting webinars, one of the things that we found incredibly important is how our own people show up. And very often, especially in the US-driven market, you have folks who are known as producers. And what you tend to find in the traditional sense of a producer is that they hide behind a camera. The camera is off. They're not very mindful on their presence and how to communicate effectively. And what we all very well know as consummate professionals in terms of presenting right here in this room is we could be as good as we want. But if there are technical issues, if there are challenges and we don't feel secure in the fact that the person next to us can truly support us, we'll be derailed. We'll lose our ability to stay present and we'll be wondering what we need to do from a technical perspective. And by bringing those skills from television and letting our people know how to come across and how to instill confidence and trust in a very quick space of time, it allows the presenter to feel comfortable and effectively have a very good and successful virtual meeting.
Yeah, it's so funny. I always know when someone's been on TV or radio, the way you use your voice I'm like, I feel like I could listen to you talk all day.
And funnily enough, you know what, Rachel, Marc isn't telling you about what he did before TV, which was radio. And I remember many years ago, I'm going 20 years ago, probably now, close on, driving around in my car late at night and listening to Marc on the radio. We hadn't even met yet, but I used to listen to him on the radio. So I
No
knew
way.
him as a radio personality. And isn't it crazy, like what can happen in 20 years? You end up working together and in a business as partners. It's kind of crazy to think about that.
That's crazy. So here's a follow-up question to this related. Do you ever get pushback from people who are like, well, I'm not a TV person. Like I'm not a radio personality. Like I don't feel comfortable with being on camera at all. Like, do you get that ever?
Yeah, all the time. Elan, I don't know if you want to add to that comment.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is that I think people they underestimate the power of being on camera. And I mean, I've said this 100 times, but when you have the opportunity to meet face to face, Rachel, I would see you, I would hear you, I would maybe smell your perfume, I would shake you by the hand. I'm not going to taste you, but I have access to all my senses. And when I'm in a virtual environment, I only have access to two. I have access to my sight and my hearing. And if you're going to rely on hearing only, you may as well just make a phone call. Like if you're going to go in a virtual meeting, my attitude is come on camera, because so much is said without saying a single word. The way that you sit in the chair, the way that you nod your head, the way that you furrow your eyebrows, and these things tell your audience a whole lot, and you can pick up so much more. You can say, oh, I noticed it looks like you're a little concerned about that, or it looks like that's frustrating to you, or I can see you're excited by that. And so it really is something that when people say, oh, I don't want to come on camera, it frustrates me a lot, because I really wish they would understand the importance of doing that. And so, yes, there's a lot of pushback, to answer your question.
And if I could add to what Elan's saying, if we had to use the same analogy around television and radio, that arguably if you're on camera, you're making it easier on yourself. And the way to describe this is radio needs a lot more color. It needs a lot more descriptive language. If you think of watching your favorite game on television, the commentator is able to prompt what he sees on the picture as you are at home. When you're listening to a commentator on radio, he has to paint that picture in your mind of the environment, the scenery, the feeling of the crowd, the impact and the energy on the field. That arguably, when we think of the realm of storytelling, if you're going to be off camera, better be a good storyteller, because that's what you need to rely on to provide far more description.
Right. Absolutely. It makes a ton of sense. And of course, you're speaking my language over here at Virtual Sapiens with the power of video and the way you show up. Where do you tend to lie in terms of like super, super highly produced video, even for something like a meeting versus something maybe that's definitely intentional, but maybe not like, the fanciest camera, the fanciest light, where do you lie on that, like super produced versus more casual?
Well, I think I'm going to hand it over to Marc, because he likes the super produced. He's very, very conscious of, I guess it comes from his background in television, and he's helped me. I used to have a clear black background. I thought in the beginning of the pandemic, listen, I just don't want everyone to see my mess behind me. So I kind of went to a secondhand furniture store. I said, give me some of those desk dividers, put them in put them with Velcro in like a V behind me, put them on wheels, and I'm just going to wheel them in behind me over here so no one can see anything. And Marc said to me, it's probably a good idea that maybe you might want to try taking that away, because then you could put things in the background that really mean a lot to you, and it's a great conversation starter. So, we don't necessarily, both Marc and I have run virtual meetings from dozens of different countries, and there you have to kind of be a little bit more flexible. You try and find a good place with good light. Marc has got some cool tools that he's shared with me about how you can raise your laptop up so that the camera's at eye level. And those little things make a difference, in terms of how you come across. It doesn't take a lot, but it is very effective when you do it right. Marc, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. You were mentioning earlier on about the aspect of when we meet in person and how you're able to get far more signaling around that. And when you're meeting virtually, it's what you don't say that can add to the conversation. Whether you're at your home location or another location, if you're just taking a few more minutes of mindfulness and how you want to show up, what's being shown in your background, especially a lot of us have connected on the road via a hotel room, and it literally takes 5 minutes. It just is the mindfulness over the lighting, which I always travel with lighting. And it kind of compacts itself into a small case. It doesn't require much space whatsoever. Elan was referencing these great contraptions that allow you to put your laptop into eye level. And then you just look at the background. And there are just some things to always be mindful of. Always have some form of background lighting. It just adds depth to your picture. You can do that in a hotel room because there are a million lights in there. The thing is, if you were meeting in person and you did not care about how you show up, you'll probably arrive in pajamas. But you don't. So we have to be mindful that this is a new set of behavior skills that we have to implement. Once we're aware of the reason why we have the camera at eye level, why we want to put some depth into our picture to create a sense of naturalness around us, it doesn't take much. It will take about as much time as it takes to choose an outfit for your interaction.
Yeah. And so like virtual backgrounds versus real backgrounds, I'm guessing you guys are fully in the real background camp.
We are, but actually there's a very interesting thing. It's interesting that you mentioned this, because Marc and I have always been, well, I didn't really care. As I said, I had a black background and people would say, you look like you're in space. I said, well, you what do you care? As long as you can focus on me. And I think you don't want stuff in the background that's going to detract people from the attention that you're trying to get as the person speaking. So we always believe that the real background does add some, it feels as if you've got nothing to hide, right? But there was a recent interaction that we had with somebody that, there were some things that they didn't necessarily want to share with everyone else. This was their private space in their home. And, when they moved suddenly like that, we caught a glimpse of it and we could say, oh, okay, I understand why you didn't want to share that with everyone. So I can understand why there are legitimate reasons why people might have a virtual or a blurred background. I even work with this one client that works in the aerospace industry. A lot of government contracts, they have to be so careful that they don't inadvertently put something up on a whiteboard and then share that through the camera with the entire world. Maybe the meeting gets recorded and now suddenly military secrets are getting leaked. So there are legitimate reasons why you wouldn't want to. But I think generally, for the most part, most people should do it in, have a real background. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think my co-founder is so funny because he's a total music fanatic, and he has these phenomenal guitars and musical instruments behind him, and he always blurs his background. And I'm like, anytime, I'm like, why? I'm like, don't do that. Because, and then when he does show up to like a client or prospect call, and you can see everything. I mean, the number of people who are like, oh, I play this, or,
Exactly.
I grew up, and I'm like, well, that's amazing. You just brought such a different aspect and rapport to what would otherwise have been such a kind of drab experience. So yeah, it's, as with most things.
If I had to add just very quickly, that I tend to see it a little bit differently when it comes to blurred backgrounds. It actually generates more distraction for me because I'm quite curious to know what the blob is behind them. And because of the technology, and this is something which is really important for everyone, that you want to come across as clear as possible. You mentioned earlier about cameras. Well, you can have the best camera in the world, but the minute you put a virtual or blurred background in, whether it's Zoom, WebEx, Teams, it creates more processing requirements for your computer. And it also doesn't catch up as quickly. So if you just make a sudden movement and then come back here, I'll see what you had behind. So keep in mind, if you're trying to hide a pile of washing behind you, going, oh, I'll just blur it. You make one sudden movement, I'll kind of see anyway. How about taking that 5 minutes before the meeting to set yourself up for success by moving it away?
Yep, totally. All right, let's move on here. So where do you see virtual hybrid meetings going from here? There's already been so much evolution, but like, what's next?
Can I jump in?
Please.
So the term hybrid, as you well know, Rachel, came in late 2020. It was becoming more and more of a normalized term. And I think ideally the whole point is it's having some folks in an office and some folks somewhere else. That's really what it boils down to. And I arguably feel this term has become slightly obsolete because with the way the so-called return to work, should we say, evolution is carrying forth versus those who are still very adamant in having flexible time to work from any particular location, not just WFH, but WFA, which is working from anywhere. The idea of hybrid is not really giving the full picture. It's Some people are at the workplace and they're happening to connect there. There could be a conference meeting where a group of people are meeting in person. It's becoming not as regular because more and more people are choosing to be remote based in certain times. I mean, ultimately, if you're going to go into a physical work location to dial into a virtual call, why are you in the physical location?
Yeah.
Might as well just stay at home and make that connection. So ultimately, when you look at where it's going, I think it's coming down to behavior and being more mindful in how we tend to see this. Because Rachel, you hear this from a lot of folks that they say, oh no, the virtual experience is much worse, not as great as that in-person experience.
Mm-hmm.
But what are they doing? What kind of intention are they putting towards that virtual interaction to make sure that folks feel engaged and included and feel value out of that interaction with you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We get that all the time with at Virtual Sapiens. Obviously, the work that we're doing is to help the humans who are behind the screens really show up. But it's so funny. I think Zoom, maybe 6 months or so ago, you probably saw this article came out and they were like, we're bringing everyone back into the office because you can't build trust over video. And I was like, okay, first of all, wow, like Zoom, you're saying that you can't build trust over your own platform. Like, we all know that that's not true.
No.
But second of all, like, it's like we're missing the point. Like, if we're not being able to build trust is a behavioral thing. It's not a channel-based thing. You can build trust over the telephone, you know? Like,
and just like yourself, MeetBee is a remote first company. We started in the pandemic and our people are distributed all across the world. Not everyone's even met each other. So
we've never met our clients too, if I can say that. You know, we probably never will in many cases, never ever meet them face to face, and that's okay. You don't have to. You know, I trust Google. I've never met Google or all the founders of Google. It's not. I think it was a really silly statement on their part to say such a thing.
I was so shocked. But yeah, I mean, to your point, I think it's so interesting to hear you, Marc, say how even the term hybrid and the concept hybrid is so much more multifaceted now, than it was when it first came to us in 2020.
Yeah.
I kind of look at, to answer that question, where do I see it going from here? The question is, how far do you want me to go in the future? Because I sort of said, I have a tendency to think a little bit too far sometimes. But, I kind of look to the science fiction that we all grew up with, the Star Trek and the Star Wars, as ways to sort of see how we might be able to connect. Because the way that if we see Obi-Wan Kenobi coming up or Darth Vader chatting to the Emperor or whatever, and he just comes up as like a hologram, well, that's a virtual meeting. There's a bunch of people in the room and there's somebody on another planet, who knows where they are. If you see Captain Kirk talk to the Klingons over the up periscope, whatever he says, and says up screen, and he has a virtual meeting, he doesn't say, oh, hold on, did we send them the right Zoom link? So I think there's what I see is happening is a blurring of the platforms into something that's a little bit more cohesive, so that it's just easier to connect with people. I think there's a lot of companies trying to fight their way to be the predominant force for that. I don't know who's going to win ultimately. But I always said to Marc, if you look at Star Trek and Scotty, it's like, beam me up, Scotty. Everyone knows that phrase. I said, one day, Scotty is one of our people. He's one of our MeetBee producers, right? He's the guy that's facilitating the connecting of people, whether that's physically beaming them down through whatever technology that is, or doing it virtually. This is what it's about. It's about connecting. And I think that we'll never, no matter how far we go into the future, we're never as a species going to stop wanting to connect with people, even if it's one day between planets.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Amazing. So we've talked about a number of things that our audience could take away and immediately improve their virtual presence in meetings. What would be, like, if there was like one thing for each of you that you would say, like, definitely in the next virtual meeting, do this, what would it be?
Marc, go for it.
It's actually quite easy. It's making a choice. Do you really want to be there? And the nice thing is that there's AI to replace you if you really don't want to be there. But if you do have to be there, make it feel to others that you want to be there. How many folks have we jumped onto virtual meetings who seem so disinterested, who are looking at their second monitor, perhaps, and looking at other work and are doing other things. If you're doing other things, perhaps similarly, if we had to use a scenario of meeting in person, and how would it feel if I was meeting you and I had my cell phone like this the entire time, doom scrolling while you're talking? How would it make you feel? Chances are most people will say, well, it made me feel great. Think of the same behavior you would bring towards a virtual meeting. We tend to forget that we can see if you are doing this with your eyes. It looks like you're doing something else. If I feel like you're doing something else, in my mind, I'll become disinterested in listening to you. Want to make a better meeting? Make it that you are really willing and interested to be there and to hear others.
Beautiful.
I think Mark sort of touched a little bit of what I was going to say, which is quite simply, look into the camera. I cannot tell you the number of people that I have to share with, senior executives of major corporations, that I have say, like, I don't feel like you're talking to me. Like, stop looking at me on the screen. There I am down there, but my eyes are there. Look into the webcam. So I would just say, make it a habit. You know, my wife went to the craft store and she got these little like googly eyes. I have one on my desk over here. It's like this. She took it and she stuck one on each side of the webcam. So it's like these googly eyes staring at her. It works for her. It's silly, but it reminds her the way she needs to look. And those are the eyes of the audience. So I think, like, you know, look at me if you're going to talk to me. Otherwise, you can give the most impassioned presentation to me on the screen over there, and I'm going to feel like who you're talking to. So that's what I would say.
Awesome. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's interesting to see, like, to follow the evolution of video from, you know, video was already increasing in usage as a business channel of communication before the pandemic. And then the pandemic forced everyone online. And then there was this like kind of backfiring because people had no choice. Like, everything had to be video. Video was the only way to see another human for a while. And now we're coming into this like really new age, I feel like, where those who do decide to show up on video, it's like you really are making a choice. And therefore, like, this is such expensive real estate. Use it wisely. Right.
Beautifully put. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, Elan and Marc, thank you so much for sharing your super deep insights on virtual presence and virtual meetings with us today. Where can people connect with you?
Well, you can go to our website, which is meetbee.com. That's meetbee.com. At meetbee, across all social media, you will find us, whatever your preferred and favorite medium is. But there's nothing like connecting with us and finding yourself in a virtual meeting where we can have a chat and find out how we can support your virtual meetings in the future.
Awesome. Great. Elan, anything else from you before we sign off?
I just wanted to say thank you very much for having us as your guests. It's a pleasure to be on here, and we appreciate you having us here.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you again. And of course, as always, thank you to our audience. See you next time.